back to the 1790s and looks at newspaper reports where he discovers people being knocked down by horse-drawn carriages because of rash driving. So rash driving in Bombay was a very, very old phenomenon.
The pediment of the police headquarters at Colaba, which has a Neptune with a trident, that, you know, the first time I noticed, my heart soared. I've passed this building about innumerable times, like maybe 30,000 times, and suddenly there is a Neptune with mermaids and other seahorses frolicking around him.
Do we look at the Gateway of India merely as this ode to colonialism, whatever we think of it, or do we look at it as a place from where Abhilash Tomy began and ended his solo circumnavigation? And that is, to me, one of India's greatest sporting achievements.
We are in Mumbai, and Mumbai has historically been one of the most well-chronicled cities that has really caught the imagination of early voyagers right from Europe, the kind of cartographies that we have seen, the kind of travelogues, literature that we get to see, which really charts out Mumbai historically, and its sort of slow development from the Seven Islands to how it developed, and today the iconic name that it has as Suketu Mehta's Maximum City, which also alludes to some ways to our Lit Fest, the name of our Lit Fest, MaxCity. I will come to my first question to Murli. So Murli, you have written extensively on 19th century Mumbai. That's what a lot of your scholarship lays on. You've also translated works of Govind Narayan's Mumbai, for example. So using your own experience as a resident of the city, but also having looked at literary historical works, written about it, translated it, what would you say were some of the key vignettes that you'd like to share with our audience on this transition from Bombay to Mumbai?
Thank you, Kamalika, for that question. And I'm glad to be here on this early Sunday morning, and I'm grateful for this audience to have come here to listen to us and to my co-panelists also. And yeah, I mean, I have spent a lot of time actually rummaging around archives, libraries, and other very dusty places to look for texts on early narratives of the time when Bombay was still not a city as such. It was still sometimes a backwater. I mean, as late as 1800, it was still a backwater compared to, say, Chennai or Kolkata. And people were still trying to, debate whether they had this island had a future or not, especially because it was such a small place which didn't have a hinterland and so on and so forth. But as we all know, I mean, it sort of gathered steam from 1800, and from then on, it's been growing. And I mean, if one thought that the growth had plateaued, I mean, the current phase of growth which is happening in growth, or whatever you want to call it, which is happening in this city is mind-boggling. I mean, Govind Narayan, I mean, writing in 1863, had already predicted that there was still the creek between Bombay and Salsette. That is the area. The Bombay was the island which ended at Sion and Mahim, and then there was a creek which flew between Kurla and Sion, and the Sion fort overlooked it, and so on. So even at that time, he had predicted that very soon this city is going to, the creek is going to vanish, and the city is going to grow bigger and bigger. So I think, he was clear that there are going to be no limits even at that time. I mean, we are now going back 170 years literally, and we see that. I mean, now I'm worried about the Thane Creek itself. I mean, parts of it have already been recovered, and I don't think. I mean, maybe the Navy can try and circumambulate Salsette. I mean, which is one of my favorite projects, but I don't think even they would be able to, because of the amount of sedimentation and stuff going on. But with some dredging still possible. But if we let it go now, I think very soon the islands will no longer be an island. I think that is something which is happening, and which perhaps the people in power are actually pushing for that. I mean, why do we need the Thane Creek? I mean, that is a question. We may not even have the Bombay Harbour then after that. So I mean, these are all, I mean, very, what do you say, image changing, a revolution for Govind Narayan to propose that creek vanish, and or not propose, to forecast. And I am forecasting that something similar will happen with maybe in the next 20-30 years. And it's not just Govind Narayan, you know, I mean, I spent time looking at many other people who were writing about Bombay at that time. I mean, the first book on Bombay, I mean, which as far as I know and which I have looked at, is a Persian book actually. And it was called Mumbai, and Mumbai as in the soul of Mumbai, and that was the name of the book. And that was written in 1817, when literally there was, I mean, at least when Govind Narayan wrote the book, there were at least some landmarks. But in 1817, there was almost nothing here which we can now relate to after 200 years. But there was enough for him to actually write a book about not just the city, but also its inhabitants who was living here, and what were they doing, and how was the economy sort of going ahead. So I mean, so as far back as 200 years, I mean, as you rightly said in the introduction, we have so many books on Bombay. But I mean, I would like to flag this one, the Mumbai by Muhammad Shahabuddin, in Persian, as the first book published in Bombay. I mean, literally it was published around the corner here at Kala Ghoda, just on the road just where the synagogue is. So there's a lot of material available on Bombay in literally every language spoken here. I mean, Persian, Marathi. There are 2 or 3 landmark books in the 19th century. Gujarati, there are quite a few books. Persian, Urdu. There are many books. I mean, for example, I recently wrote about a book called Tilisme Bombay. And Tilisme Bombay is the enchantment of Bombay, and that really was written in Lucknow by a Parsi for the Naval Kishore Press. And he talks about what an enchanting city this place is. And you go further ahead, there are still more and more texts which sort of layer the growth and to some extent even the living conditions. I mean, for example, when somebody comes to Bombay, I just nowadays say them, welcome to hell. I mean, because that is, I mean, let us not mince words. I mean, it is what it has become now. I mean, I stay in what was a beautiful suburb called Mulund. And I mean, now it's almost like the 7th hell, especially in the last 5 years. So, and when I talk to people in Bandra, they dispute. They say that no, we are worse off. So, and every suburb is like that. I mean, so we are working actively towards some destination which boggles the imagination, but it's going on. So, on that sort of rather negative note, I stop.
So, Shabnam, I'll now come to you. Murli has already started referring to some specific neighborhoods and the kind of transitions and transformations they're going through. You have written a book on Colaba, and you also call it the diamond at the tip of Mumbai. You have also referred to it as one of the most iconic neighborhoods of this city, and you're also a resident. So, Colaba has been home. You've grown up there. There are many, maybe everyday and personal memories and narratives of you and your family linked to it. So when we sort of overlap these 2 layers of you as a journalist and as a historian looking at Colaba, and then also as a resident and somebody who grew up there, how do these 2 kind of layers overlap, and what are some of the things that you'd like to highlight about?
So first of all, a confession. I did not want to write this book. I'm primarily a writer for children. So one day my editor invited me to tea, and I thought we were talking about one middle grade series that I do called Nibby, where she gets into trouble and messes up mastership competitions, that kind of stuff. But I was completely sort of hijacked by the editor, who said we are doing a series of neighborhoods around the world, and we'd like you to write on one Mumbai neighborhood. So I said, no, I can't do. She said, okay, if you were writing on a neighborhood, what would you write? So I said, I guess Colaba, but I can't do. So then I thought I'll go home and kindly send her an email saying, very sorry, I can't do this book. But she knew me too well. So by the time my taxi reached home, the contract was in my mailbox. I did not approach this project with a great deal of excitement because I had grown up in Colaba. I'd lived my entire life in Colaba. And for me, Colaba was this place where people sell pajamas with donuts and ice creams. with feather, earrings with purple feathers dangling from them, and RTI sells lemon tarts, and that was Colaba. And then I started to do research, and I found to my absolute amazement that in 300 really short years, this little stretch of the city had transformed so rapidly, so dramatically, and in a way that reflected, I think, the growth of the city. And I'll just very quickly tell you all the story of Colaba and how it changed. I think one of the first records, the first mentions of Colaba came in the early 1700s in a letter that a guy named John Burnell wrote to his father. He was a mercenary who'd come to Mumbai, and he'd come to Colaba to measure the island. So he writes to his father, it's nothing very great. It's a little strip of land, lots of mangroves, lots of jackals, and I wasn't able to kill any of them. So that is his primary complaint about Colaba, that the jackals were too fast to be hunted. Slowly, Colaba sort of grows. So firstly, Colaba that we called Colaba today is not the Colaba of the island. That island began around Sasundok and went up to, the Prongs, the rocks that lead Prongs Lighthouse. Then there was a tiny creek. Then there was a blob of land called Old Woman's Island. And I think this was my first great shock, because I realized that actually, historically, if I look at it, I am not a Colabaite, which I always describe myself as. I am an old womanite or an old woman kar, which is quite, I don't know, not a very pretty phrase. But so anyway, so you had this creek, then you had Old Woman's Island, and then you had this massive creek that separated Old Woman's Island from the happening island of Bombay. And so Old Woman's Island and Colaba merged very quickly. There's not too many records of how they merged. I think it just became a convenience. The creek was sort of reclaimed, probably with coconut leaves and God knows, other unmentionables, probably bones and mud and God knows what. But creek between Old Woman's Island and Bombay was a big one, and was the reason why Colaba and Old Woman's Island remained very much the backwaters, very much the boondocks, the place that nobody wanted to stay. So at one point, the military, they had built some kind of structures where they sent sick soldiers or soldiers to recuperate when they were feeling down. And then it was realized that there's a letter, very funny letter, where this guy is saying, can we please have accommodation in Colaba? Because when the soldiers, the military people live in Colaba, they pursue more manly pursuits and their health is much better. And basically, they're living a more decent life. So one really wonders what the unmanly pursuits of the island of Bombay were. But essentially, they were very far from the pubs and the bars and the luscious ladies of Bombay. And so Colaba became this place where the army was stationed. It was also a place where merchants sent their sick daughters to recuperate. So you get a sense of a very placid place filled with various criminals of various kinds. I think at the curtain raiser, I spoke about this woman named Mrs. Sparrow. She's going to church, and an Armenian highwayman catches her and shoots off the ear of her carriage driver. And there are many similar stories about Colaba. My favorite story actually about Colaba, so what happened was, it was really a place where if you were reclusive and you weren't into parties and all, that's where you would stay. Because if you went across to the island of Bombay, there was a very high chance that you could not ride back or drive back, because when it was low tide, your carriages and your horses could drive between Bombay and Colaba. But if it was high tide, you could not. So very often people who went to parties had to turn back and request their hostess, can I please stay in your house? Which was slightly awkward. And many people felt embarrassed. The socially shy varieties like me tried to ride across and paid a very high price for it. And there's one absolutely brilliant story about this girl in a bullock cart. She's coming to Colaba to meet her relatives. And it's written by a Britisher. So obviously she starts out, I think, Muslim and ends up Hindu. So we're a little confused about who she is. But she is riding across. The tide starts coming in. The bullocks panic. And they freeze in the middle of the creek. So, of course, Our Lady stands there and cries, help me, help me. There's a British soldier. He flings off his jacket. He swims. He saves her. And this being like a proper masala story, any guesses what happens next? No, sadly. They fall in love. the soldier, they meet in secret. Then the soldier goes and asks the parents, may I please marry this girl? And the parents, any guesses what they say? We love you like a son, but no. And then tragedy ensues. The girl vanishes. It is hotly rumored that she is knocked off by her parents. So she might as well have died in the creek and saved us all a lot of trouble. And then what happens to the soldier? Come on, this is a proper tragedy. He dies of a broken heart. Yeah, so this all happened in the Colaba Creek. But then in 1836, something dramatic happened to change the nature of the neighborhood. Colaba Causeway was built. And this little strip of land that linked Bombay to Colaba suddenly made everybody look at Colaba with new eyes. All the richie riches, the money bags, already had their houses in Parel and Malabar Hill. And also they looked at Colaba and said, oh, nice place to build our factories and warehouses. And the cotton green moved to Colaba. So for a brief period, it was this sort of industrial hellhole. And if any of you know Grant's building at Atabanda Road, just next to Radio Club, that was, I think, perceived as this BKC, they imagined that all big industrial houses would have their offices there. But that failed very quickly. And anyway, this was the place where all these, the cotton green and all were. But when it became impractical, because why would you make the absolute southern tip of the city this hub? When they moved, a lot of middle-class housing came in the place of the cotton green, which in a way became this hub of this cosmopolitan mixed community hub that is now Colaba today.
Great, lovely news story for many of us. So I'll now move to Commodore Casewell, and of course, Colaba is a very important neighborhood also for the Navy. And but for many of us, Bombay is about looking out to the sea views from various neighborhoods as we move along the coast. But for maritime and naval historians such as you, it is also about looking at the city from the sea to the land. So how would you like to share some perspectives of you as a mariner, looking at the sea, looking at Bombay, its maritime history, and our understanding that is shaped by a seaward view?
Yeah, thank you so much for asking me from that point of view, because I think Murali is one of the best known historians of the city. So I'll leave pretty much Bombay's history to him, and Shabnam is one of the most chronicler of the places. But, I'm glad you mentioned this, because the sea in many ways is like as far as Mumbai is concerned, it's like that mother in Hindi cinema, Always there is a comforting presence, makes that, muli ka paratha and gajar ka halwa, but hardly matters otherwise. I mean, you see, as a young person, I saw that. I'm so glad he mentioned about the creeks and the islands. But for a long time, I felt that despite the sea being around so much, the sea did not enter into conversations where art and literature and culture in this part of the city was concerned. So how does a person from the sea view it? I mean, mariners tend to, because often when you go to when I go on a ship to a different part, when I go to a different country, we typically spend 4 or 5 days. So perhaps our way of looking at that city is different from the way people in that country look at it, good, bad, ugly. So often I have thought about how does a mariner, how does a merchant navy man, a navy person view the city and view it from the sea. So I'll give you a couple of examples to begin with. I mean, when you are on a ship, let's say typically I'm this young officer on a watch on a ship that's entering Mumbai harbor at night. Now, from about 20 or 30 miles, that's about 50 kilometers, at night, you call it raising the light. You get the first loom of the prong's light, You see it from a distance, and that's an important metric for the officer of the watch. Are you raising the prong's light? Because it's about navigational safety too. But for many people like me, it also sent a shiver of excitement. Mumbai. That's your first sort of, announcement of Mumbai, so to say. It's like the pilot in the aircraft saying, we're going to land in a bit. So it sent this fantastic shiver of excitement. We're going to enter soon, young guys. So a couple of hours later, you come, you see the lighthouse, you navigate through the buoys, and then you get alongside and say, okay, I'm going to have next 4 or 5 days in harbor. And that's when you did what bachelors did in this place, and the lovely place that Colaba has become in recent years. But you wondered if the same excitement was shared by others. Or when I was, let's say I'm now the navigating officer of a ship and we're leaving Mumbai harbor, the spire of the Rajabai Tower becomes a navigation mark for fixing your ship. I don't know whether people in Rajabai Tower are aware of that. Many years later, when I went for the first of my degrees to enroll in the Rajabai Tower, that's when the university came to be seen differently. But the spire is always a navigation mark. Or the Mackinnon Mackenzie building, with great delicious irony, now located on the Walchand Hirachan mark, So Mackinnon Mackenzie was another building that you use for navigation. So I believe that we tended to see the city very differently, and we see these landmarks. Therefore, gateway, is it about going to Elephanta? Is it about going to Karanja? There used to be a time when the big ships were anchored and the berths were not there, that often the boatwallas used to charge money to give a binocular or a telescope view of the Vikrant and the Mysore and Delhi to people as they were going to Elephanta, So that was what Mumbai or Bombay was in those days. So that sort of prompted me to look and say that, look, all the landmarks in the city, the gateway of India. Now I've shifted to Navi Mumbai. I see the Atal Setu from the other side. So whether it's the Marine Drive, whether it's the Sea Link, whether it's the Atal Setu, whether it's the Gateway of India, the architectural landmark, most of them are in many ways related to the city, to the sea. But does the sea figure, therefore, adequately in your conversations? And I've brought out many of these issues. One of the earliest books that I did was on INS Mumbai, a ship actually by that name being commissioned here. That was in 2001 or 2. And when you researched that, you found there were actually 10 ships by the name of Bombay or Mumbai that the British had commissioned in those times. 10 ships, beginning right from the middle of the 18th century. So the 10 Mumbais or Bombays in a way mirrored the growth of this city. But you wondered if people were seeing it from that lens. So that's primarily been my view. I mean, we can talk about the naval uprising. So the fort, the castle barracks, the naval dockyard, I do understand there are some issues of security that acts as a barrier for the rest of the people. But still, I feel that, if the maritime aspects or the sea aspects, and it's not about Navy, but the sea aspects came into discussions. And that's why I said I'm so glad that Murli brought that. Unfortunately, I don't think even our smaller draft ships can navigate the creek. We'll have to use a fisherman's boat. But that's what it is. So I believe actually one answer to the problem that Murli is talking, if you gave a greater maritime focus and made people aware that this is an island city, that as much as it's home of Bollywood, as much as it's about cricket, as much as it is about, the financial capital, this is about seas and waters and ocean. I suppose then the islands, the mangroves, the creeks, all of them will get conserved too.
Absolutely. And I think it's about, constantly being mindful of this larger urban geography and urban landscape that Mumbai situates itself within, and that also links to our environment, the kind of degradation, climate, the larger conversations of what happens when we forget our rivers. Mithi River is almost like a nala. So those are different conversations. But when we turn our back to the sea and we forget about the origins, then it has larger urban implications. So with that, I'll come back to Murli and talk about another book that you have have edited, which is the writings of GRB Gigi Bhoy. He himself was a 19th century historian and one of the first to really link past to present, transitions, transformation, and also in the 19th century already talk about city heritage and the loss of city heritage. This was also a time when the fort walls were probably coming down, the iconic and expansive Victorian Gothic architecture was coming up. So, and you have looked into his writing, his views, his perceptions of Bombay of the time in great depth. So if you can highlight to us what were some of those concerns and the transitions and transformations which were already on the minds of historians of the time.
JRB Gigi Bhoy was born in the year in which the Congress was founded in Bombay, and he died in 1960, the year in which Maharashtra was founded. So, I mean, two epochal events, and his lifespan was during that time, and he was writing mainly from the 1920s to the 1950s. So, a 30-year career in which he did what historians or people who want to write on history do now. You know, a lot of, I don't know if there are historians in the audience, but a lot of the history right now is keyword search. The Times of India is now scanned and available. People are just doing whatever, Kolaba or Mulund or whatever, and they are doing this keyword history, okay? Using it as a substitute for real research. No harm in doing keyword search, but they are using it as a substitute for real research. And going back to Gigi Bhoy did the same thing, which is scanning the newspapers of 19th century Mumbai 100 years later. And I mean, for him, it was a real, I mean, he was one of the first people to actually go back to primary sources and look at what was being written in the Bombay newspapers in the 1800s, 1830s, 1850s, and so on. And he was literally the pioneer in using newspapers to start thinking about the city as a historical unit, so to speak. And over 30 years, he wrote literally 150 articles. I mean, I went on this hunt looking for his article. Nobody had heard of him. So I went on this hunt looking for his articles. And at the end of it all, I could finally find 100. But I think I must have still missed out 50. And it's on a variety of subjects. It could be on, it could be a little vignette on a mango tree in Mazgaon, which flowered twice a year. So once in the usual April-May season, and then once in October-November. I mean, so it could be on that, or it could be on the laws of on the loss of old buildings. I mean, like let's say one of the buildings is being demolished, he would then lament that loss of the demolition because of whatever. I mean, the basically developmental pressures, and talk about the history of that building and why and how it could have been conserved. And this was all in the 1940s. And some of the concerns which he had are concerns which we have right now. I mean, walking in the city. I mean, he goes back to the 1790s and looks at newspaper reports where he discovers people being knocked down by horse-drawn carriages because of rash driving. So rash driving in Bombay was a very, very old phenomenon. And the fact that people who had to walk just could not walk. And then he sort of, there's a whole narrative from the 1790s going all the way up to the 1920s about how walking is such a hazardous business in the city. And I think it's become 1,000 times worse in this 100 years. I mean, you have a current municipal commissioner when he's asked this, and this is from the Times of India, and just last week he answered the question saying, walking is an issue, so we'll create a walking promenade somewhere. The people who are supposed to look at infrastructure are just unwilling to understand what it means to be living, working, and earning a livelihood in the city. And Gigi Bhoy was concerned about all these things even 100 years ago. And talking about neighborhoods, how neighborhoods change. So he would talk about the neighborhoods of Falkland Road and Kamatipura, which are now viewed with a certain jaundiced eye, but in those days were still nicely well-planned places. So he talks about a lot of the changes which are happening right in front of him, plus also goes back and talks about all the institutions of Bombay which sort of have disappeared. For example, he talks about, he was also very interested in the growth of the legal side in Bombay, how laws were developed in Bombay and how legal institutions were developed. So he wrote a lot of essays on that subject. But I think most importantly, he was worried, or he was concerned with his own community. He was a Parsi. And in 1885, when he was born, I mean, he was the great grandson of two very rich men. One was Jamshedji Jiji Boy, who still has got institutions named after him, and that man Jiji Boy died in 1859. And he was also, on the other side, he was the great grandson of Jiji Boy Dada Boy, who was one of the first persons to build a Agyari in Colaba. So and yes, I remember reading about how the Colaba Agyari was built and inaugurated by Jiji Boy's great grandfather in the 1840s. So, and in 1885, when he was born into what would be the Ambani family of that time. They literally owned whatever Shapurji Paulanji owns now was owned by his family. He owns of one of the richest families in Bombay. But by the time he died in 1960, almost everything was gone, including the place where he was. I mean, if you walk down towards Fountain from here, you would see this facade of a building which is still standing. I still don't know why, but it says Alice Building. It is just only, I mean, it's only the front part which is there, but everything else is gone. I think it burned down in the 1960s or something, and which is where Jiji Boy sat and wrote all his articles. So practically, by the time he died, stood for had already gone, including his family's wealth, as well as the city itself had changed beyond imagination for the Parsi community, from being the leading, arbiters of what would happen. They had, I mean, by the time, within 15 years of independence, they had already been sidelined. So I think it's a little bit of a lament as well as a celebration, his writings. And I think a lot of our Bombay scholars are now, I think, on the lament mode. I mean, for example, you have Naresh Fernandez writing, I mean, about 10, 15 years back, a book titled A City Adrift. And that was, I think, if he had to title that same book now, he would say a city which is already sunk. I mean, it's not just adrift. I mean, we are in such a bad situation. I mean, we have to literally, bite the bullet and accept the fact that living in this city has gone from bad to worse. And as historians, as well as residents and observers, we have to look at this process, and we have to understand why it's happening. And I think a lot of us understand why it is happening. So I think these things have to be looked at, and there is no escaping reality in history. So I think on that rather somber note, again, I would stop.
Right. I think this constant balancing act between, continuing to seeing positive aspects about the city while being mindful of all the harsh realities that we face every day is as much a story of that transition and transformation. So, Shabnam, I'll come back to you. And you have written this book, What Maya Saw, and you often use history as a tool for young people to sort of discover the city. And this, while What Maya Saw is a book of fiction for young adults, you kind of use very cleverly, leave about clues, almost like a treasure hunt and a clue hunt approach to discovering vignettes and nuggets about the city. It's also a very novel and engaging way to bring into a new fold of young readership and making the city accessible to a young readership without going through, the heavy aspects of history. So if you can just share a little bit about what your methodology is and how you engage with history, but present it to young audiences.
So I'm not a historian, but I am a mother of three. And I think What Maya Saw was really born out of what I was seeing around me, because my daughters would have their friends come over for play dates. And especially after holidays, I would hear these little girls all saying, I was in Vancouver. It is so beautiful. When I grow up, I'm going to go and live in Sydney or random places around the world. And they would know all the little details about the history and the structures of strange Prague or Budapest, and be completely blank about their own city. And this was something that bothered me a lot. And I thought that the next book I wrote should be a book which talks about Mumbai and how to talk about Mumbai, which in a way that is palatable to young people. Being a mother of three, the worst thing to do is to go and say, look around you, see what's there, because that's the quickest way they will shut their eyes and turn their faces. And the other thing I was noticing in the young generation is that even when they're on the road, in a taxi, in a bus, in a car, even walking, they're only looking at their screens. Nobody is looking at the beauty and ugliness around them. And that is frightening. It is really, I think this inwardness is really scary. So what Maya saw was in a sense born from that. It is a very, it's a fantasy adventure. Young girl goes to attend a local history workshop in a college called St. Paul's College. Bombayites, Mumbaikars will recognize it as St. Xavier's College. Beautiful Gothic college in the middle of the city with little dark staircases with cobwebs and gargoyles and, quatrefoils and trefoils and very atmospheric. And she stumbles upon she realizes she's part of some kind of prophecy to find some keys. And, I won't get into that. That is very young adult. But essentially, she's stuck in this sort of scenario that is not of her making, and the keys that she has to find involve a clue hunt around the city. So the clue hunt was my way of making younger people just open their eyes when they walked. Okay, so the clues are very simple. There's nothing dramatic because in a way Bombay does not have these big dramatic structures that you could use. But the pediment of the Standard Chartered building at Fountain, the pediment of the police headquarters at Colaba, which has a Neptune with a trident. That the first time I noticed, my heart soared. I've passed this building about innumerable times, like maybe 30,000 times, and suddenly there is a Neptune with mermaids and other seahorses frolicking around him. The Lakshmi statue at PM Road, it's just a beautiful statue that soars above a building. We don't see it because we only see the AC sticking out of the building, the wires and the traffic. But there are all these little bits of Mumbai that make the city extraordinary. And so I wrote this book and I didn't know what would happen. And to my absolute delight, there were parents who came and they complained to me. They said, our kids made us drive one Sunday morning to see all the clues of what Maya saw. And there were kids who came from other cities and did that clue hunt, which made me very happy. So in a small way, it worked. And local history for me is really the bedrock of a lot that I write. Even in my not new, but sort of newer book, Zen, the couple, it's a love story. An unlikely love story, a couple with very different political and different politics and ideology. And in a way, they get to know each other and they bond over local history, because it all begins because this girl has to take this boy for a walk because she knows local history and he's visiting. And as they walk down Colaba Causeway, which is the center of my universe, sorry, they start talking about the past, about the present, and they realize that while they are different in many ways, they connect when they talk about the past and about history. And again, for me, it was very important that young people, when they walk in the city, not just Colaba, when they walk anywhere, they realize that in many ways they are walking on water. They're walking on where they are walking were once fish, where they are walking was once a very different world where dragonflies sort of were migrating. The same dragonflies that migrate to Africa today were migrating then. So, you see that continuation and in a way feel this connection with your world. And I strongly feel that when you feel connected with your world, when you feel connected with the part of the world that you belong to, you do things to make it better. And that is my belief as a young adult writer.
Absolutely. And in fact, we're sitting at one edge of Colaba and having this conversation. So coming back to you, Commodore Kesnod, you have written extensively about the link between Mumbai and the Indian Navy and the expansive waterfront that is there, the maritime infrastructure, the ports, the docks, the shipbuilding infrastructure that we have. And this entire maritime repository, which this city has, is pretty much out of plain view for the general public and its residents. So but on the same hand, some of the oldest historic buildings of Mumbai are behind the high walls of these precincts. So if you can just tell us a little bit about these precincts, the dockyard, the BPT, the Mazgaon shipbuilding precincts, and how they contribute so much to our city's history, but maybe we are not able to engage.
I'll take off from what both Murli and Shabnam said. I'll share their concerns, but maybe probably not lamenting that much, to see if we can recast some of it. Yes, certainly. There's a lot of maritime infrastructure hidden behind walls, and I'll bring out some of those aspects. But I believe let's look at it from a bigger point of view. And what Shabnam said, how do I feel connected to the city? And that's one way to probably save and conserve and bring back all this. So if you are sort of constantly thinking about that, I mean, what makes Shivaji Park iconic? I'm a great follower of cricket. What makes Shivaji Park iconic? I mean, people in the media are bemoaning that Mannat residents are moving out into a rented house for a few days. So, you know, I mean, so suddenly someone comes there and that becomes iconic. But NGMA and other places, I mean, there's so many, nothing against the resident of Mannat. But the point is, a great degree of this can be driven by good and imaginative ways in which we can reimagine our architecture. I give you one example. Do we look at the Gateway of India merely as this ode to colonialism, whatever we think of it, or do we look at it as a place from where Abhilash Tomy began and ended his solo circumnavigation? And that is, to me, one of India's greatest sporting achievements. That place should have at least a board, a plaque, something there, and that should become your new selfie point, you know, with one little bust or something, you know, that should, so we can start reimagining architecture, this 100 years of Gateway of India. So how do we look at things differently? Now the Navy is doing some bit of it, because you can't go behind those walls. They brought a model of Vikrant and kept it at this Regal Circle. There's a aircraft somewhere else. And of course, we got to keep doing, and lots of citizen groups need to come in. You saw the other day, the interesting discussion we had about this P1 and P2 buildings, you know, very, very obscurely named P1 and P2. Did they actually store opium, which was to become then, you know, this one for the opium wars, and in a whole way that the history of, the geopolitics of that time was defined. So, it is about recasting or looking at existing histories differently. There is in Ballard Pier a memorial to people who took part in World War I. Like he says, it's about how you look, whether you're looking at that Lakshmi statue. In just short of the Ballard Gate is that memorial. I don't know whether how many of us are aware. There's a sailors memorial, Lashkar memorial, just little further up there. The naval uprising, and yesterday Sanjeev Sanyal talked about why it was a hugely important movement. The Navy has actually started an uprising memorial here. People ought to visit it. Everyone got to popularize it. So I believe if you start looking at these things differently, yes, the Navy would like to give visits inside the precincts, and it is done sometimes. The maritime history takes walks. But there are security concerns. I mean, let's not forget 2611. Let's not forget blasts near the Gateway of India and all that. So the genuine security concerns. Why? I feel bad terribly, because often driving at night on those lonely, you don't feel you are in Mumbai, you know, on those lonely streets inside the naval dockyard. It's a city within a city. So I do take your part. But I believe in some ways, if the planners, if historians, if architects like you, we sit together and reimagine the city from a maritime point of view, and put, like we discussed, the Panvel yesterday. There's a new airport coming there. That's going to be a new center, new city, maybe a little bit, you know, the expanse moving all the way there. But one way to imagine it is to put a great model of the Panvel there, build a nice garden around it, commemorate those people, commemorate the place, because you got to have connectedness. If you don't have that, as a history person myself, I do also find that if historians don't get on the popular culture bandwagon, little bit infra-dig as it may seem, you will not win the audiences over.
I'll just do one round of maybe just common questions. So the same questions which all three of you can answer. And then we'll do some audience questions with the time that we have remaining. So Mumbai was the Urbs Prima and Indus, as we know, the first, pretty much considered the important financial center, first city of empire in many ways. from the trade and enterprise point of view. But the city is not only about its edifices and the other aspects. It's as much about the people, right? And by people, of course, we have all the illustrious and glorious founding fathers, the elite, the patronage, the philanthropers. But we also have the ones who toil, the native seafaring coolies, the dock workers, the mill workers. And today, are we kind of beginning to, in the kind of superhighways and skyscrapers that we are building, beginning to forget some of this this other layer of the people who make Mumbai? And are we chronicling those realities, those stories, and giving enough to the people currency that the city has?
Yeah. So I totally agree. I was a journalist at the time when, the mills, for example, were completely dying, were collapsing, and buildings were coming up in their place. And every time I go, and I lived in Dadar for 10 years, and that entire neighborhood is transformed. There is not a smidgen of the past over there, which is tragic because in a way Mumbai was a mill city. And every time I drive past or walk past there, I'm wondering what happened to those people. Where did they go? I mean, of course, they reinvented themselves. They got other jobs. Presumably they are now, I don't know, hopefully doing well. Some of them are couriers, I imagine. Some of them are college grads, I imagine. I don't know. But the way we've erased them entirely is terrifying. And right now I'm working on a children's book for middle grade children based around the textile strike and the collapse of the industry. The central character is a child of a mill worker. And there is a lot documented, but it is all extremely dry and not very accessible. So you have organizations like TISS and Pukar and all documenting, but who is reading? How many people are getting to it? There are, of course, a few movies around it as well. But I completely agree with you that the Bombay, the original Mumbaikar, that working class person, even the fishing villages, the vanishing of them. I mean, there are documents saying that there were how many, about 80 or 100 fishing villages scattered around the islands of Bombay. Now maybe there are 4 or 5. I don't know. I'm trying to think. Perhaps Kaf Parade, Dharavi, Mahim, Wadala, I think, has one. I don't, so handful. So where have all these people gone? What has happened to them and how have we supported them? We haven't. And totally agree that it is a huge issue.
I'll give you, in the interest of brevity, a very short answer. Yes, we have, like I said, we seem to have erased. And the single line answer to this is what I keep telling in every school, college, and even primary school I go. Stop. Again, I've got nothing against Esselward. Stop sending your children on picnic to Esselward. Let them go out fishing with the fishermen. Right? Unless our children go out into the sea, fishermen, unless they visit the mills, I don't know how many are there, they will not know what it means to be a coolie if you don't go out fishing. So I have nothing against amusement parks, but why? Real life beats any amusement park, right?
Yeah, I mean, so I would like to just highlight a different kind of erasure. I mean, when we talk about Bombay, I mean, Bombay is now not just the old island, but also a much larger area. And we talk about heritage, built heritage, and so on and so forth. And we write books on them, we celebrate them, we have walks, and so on and so forth. So all that is happening to some extent in the southernmost part of the island. But even in the northern parts of this very island on which we are sitting right now, and especially Salsette, which is basically where most of Bombay now lives. I mean, there's the concept of heritage, the concept of, I mean, even that place had old buildings. Even that place, I mean, in fact, I mean, Salsette is about the most, what do you say, the place so much full of heritage going back all the way to 2,500 years. I mean, built heritage. I mean, it's an amazing place, but we just are not able to visualize it as a site for history. We are just visualizing it as a site to house people, mass housing earlier. And now, of course, now the mass housing has shifted further beyond that also. But for example, I stay in Mulund, and I can see that all whatever could have been classified as heritage structures in Mulund in the last 10 years people have been racing to demolish them. Even before they can get planning approvals for their new buildings, they are making sure that the old buildings are being razed first, because they know that who knows when the BMC will declare which building as an heritage. So basically, the entire built heritage of Mulund has disappeared. And this is not just about Mulund, this is about almost the entire western and central suburbs. Every bit of heritage is gone, being erased and not being talked about. And even before it's being talked about, it's disappearing. So I think we need to sort of open our eyes to the fact that the city is a much vaster space, and we need to I'm glad that Shabnam has written a book on Colaba, but we need books on Andheri, we need books on Mulund, dare I say, and we need books on so many other places which are all deserving of full books by themselves. So I think there's a lot of erasure going on in various other ways, and of course the erasure of the common man is, he's fated to be erased. So, it's almost as bad as that. So, I guess, yeah, but I think there's a lot of recovery still possible. Let me end on a positive note. There's a lot of recovery still possible. And, I think, these kind of festivals, which and hopefully many of them which reach out even further, and the kind of stuff which Shabnam is writing beyond history and reaching out to more people, and what he just proposed. Why go to SL World, man? I can't think of a worse place to yeah. So I think there's just so much to see in the city and so much to experience that I think a lifetime will be short for all of that.
I'll give you the answer. When I went to a school, they bemoaned during COVID that SL World is closed. We don't know what to do. I said, take them out fishing. That's how this happened.
So I think all of y'all have made such important points, and I also kind of say this a lot, that in Bombay there is this imagination, the loved Bombay, the loved parts of Bombay, that one we want to preserve as the postcard city, but then there is the unloved parts of Bombay, which to our minds are extremely dispensable things that if they change, if they go away, if they're completely brought down and flattened and rebuilt, nobody really cares about it, because that is of course the other side of development, and that's another conversation of all the superhighways and the larger imagination of the MMR. But also the question remains that in this transition from Bombay to Mumbai, who are we taking along and who are we erasing, and who are the ones we are willing to compromise with and dispense with. So on that note, we will conclude our panel today, and thank you everyone for joining us in this very, very engaging discussion. Thank you.